All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to The Latest, the official podcast of the Brock Press, where we take you behind the headlines and do a deep dive into some of the many interesting articles written by our team this week. I'm joined, as always, by our managing editor, Holly Morrison, and our editor-at-large, Jonah Dayton. How are you both doing?
Doing well. Last one before reading week.
Also doing pretty well. Excited to not have classes or work for a week.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with taking some time to ourselves. Everyone's been working hard and putting out some good content, so time to take some time to eat way too much turkey and way too much gravy and fall asleep on the couch. That's what I will definitely be doing, at least for part of the reading week. But before that, we have some great articles. Not to toot our own horns, but they're all our articles this week. There's other fantastic articles, but we just found it's always easier to talk about something you know so well because you wrote it yourself. So we kind of are going to just dig into those. But with that, I will hand it off to Jonah to get us started. Right. Whenever you are ready to go. Yeah, you're good.
So the first article we're going to be talking about was my feature this week. It was basically just a sit-down one-on-one with the new director of Brock Sports, Melissa Krist. And I basically just talked about a little bit about her background. She has 25 years of experience working at the University of Toronto in their athletic department. And prior to that, she was a student athlete herself, playing basketball at Durham. So definitely a really good person for Brock to hire. And as we'll get into a bit later, this is the first full-time athletic director in over 2 years because Neil Lumsden stepped down in 2019, and then Emily Allen was the interim AD until then. So there hasn't really been a full-time person in that role until Melissa just got hired in the spring. And so I just wanted to do a little piece about her, or actually a long piece about her as a feature, but just to sort of introduce her. And she gave some really great insights, but I wanted to just throw it to Holly. I guess Noah doesn't really have too much experience in Brock Sports, but it seems, I mean, we both covered Brock Sports now for 4 years, and I just wanted to get your take on what finally having a full-time person in this role will do for the programs.
I mean, I obviously think it's great. Like, Jonah, you and I have both been here since 2018. I think we both started in September 2018. Neil Lumsden stepped down in January 2019. So we had, like, absolutely no months with a full-time athletic director to work with because we were both in sports. And that sort of made a lot of stuff super hard, just sort of in terms of, like, continuity. Emily Allen is, like, definitely did her best and, like, was doing the best of what she had. And, like, very nice. But having a full-time athletic director in that position sort of just makes it so that Brock Sports can continue to grow, because we've seen with, like, a lot of programs, especially with, women's basketball winning the OUA last year, playing in the national title game, and then women's volleyball almost playing at nationals before COVID shut everything down. Like, Brock Sports teams are getting a lot better, and I think they do kind of need that full-time direction to sort of give them that push, and I think it's pretty awesome.
I actually, surprisingly enough, have a little something to say, mostly just based on your article, but Holly kind of jogged my memory about the continuity bit, because it's, I never really think about it much, just because, again, the sports don't particularly mean that much to me. But, the regular turnover is so high, but having to think on kind of the front end and back end, now you're dealing with, like, a bottleneck of people at both ends, right? You have that last year coming in, as well as this year coming in as rookies who never got to play. And then you have people who didn't lose their eligibility, and more people than I would have thought, again, because sports don't mean much to me, but more people than I would have ever thought who are staying another year because they have that other eligibility year. So I thought that was kind of interesting to hear of dealing with that issue and how important it is to have continuity, like you mentioned, Holly, there, and kind of the coaching world for the teams, but also at that top level with Melissa.
Yeah, I talked about it a bit, but like Noah was saying, there's just so many incoming athletes this year between the no season last year, and like Noah was saying, the people who came back for an extra year that they normally wouldn't have. And she talked about that they're sort of doing that on a program by program basis because there's every sport reduced the schedule by 25%. That was just like across youth sports because of COVID and travel restrictions. So it is a little bit tricky. But the way she was talking about it said that they're sort of going to do as best job that they can to ensure the student athlete experience is still maximized in this year, and sort of continuing on that line of thinking, that student athlete experience that she talked about in the article was the big events that we all know and love. The Steel Blade Classic, which would have been a few weeks ago. The hometown baseball would also have been a few weeks ago, and then they always have the Paint the Meridian Red basketball games the first Saturday in the new year. Obviously, those we can't have, but Melissa did mention that if the Canada Games Park across the street is finished in the new year, they will be showcasing the men's and women's hockey team there in an inaugural game for Brock students, which I think would be great. And Holly, as someone who covered the hockey teams, I just wanted to get your opinion on that, because I'm like someone like me, I'm not really a hockey person, but even still, that would be just great to have a big Brock sports event in the new year.
I mean, yeah, like just from the perspective of like getting to have a big Brock sports event, that's like super cool. Like Steel Blade is so many people's like favorite part of homecoming. It's like the thing. Like alumni come out for that. But even just like being able to have like hockey essentially on campus is gonna do like I think a whole lot for Brock sports, because right now the rink that they play at is kind of like, it's a little bit in the middle of nowhere. It's in like West St. Catharines, but like very far. Like to get to the rink that they play at, which is the Seymour Hanna Center, to get there from campus, you would have to take the 416 downtown and then the 415 from downtown to the rink. So it's like about an hour and 15 minutes round trip, which I made every weekend for 2 years. But like I was getting paid to do that. So I can't blame students for not coming. The crowds, like in the past few years, for men's and women's hockey, like it's like just across the board, were really bad. Like they're not great. They don't get a whole lot of crowds. They get like parents and friends and family, but like very, very rarely are there like students who come out for like the reason being that they want to watch a hockey game. So I think the Canada Games sort of park building complex is gonna like help that a lot, and I think that's something sort of super important, really great to look forward to for the purposes of not having to take all those buses, but also just for like Brock sports and the hockey program in general.
Yeah, I hope Brock's season is able to, like pay the value of that facility is worth, because I know it's not their building, which is kind of the kicker. It's that it's a shared of at least three entities, being Brock, and then you have this city of St. Catharines and Thorold, and it might even be Niagara region as well. So there might actually be 4 people with claims to the park. So it's I do hope that Brock realizes the value of that and puts their money where their mouth is, and maintains their claim to it, because it's definitely a huge draw, especially as a very, very amateur, non-avid sports watcher, very casual sports watcher who might go to a single game if it was convenient on campus and I was already on campus. That would be a big deal, especially in a nice new facility like that. And that building is really taking shape. It really looks fantastic and could be a great addition to Brock if they, really maintain their stake in it after the games.
Yeah, and conversely, just the basketball games, which are on campus, have always seen good crowds, because you're getting, like Holly was saying, the parents and the friends and whatever, but you're also getting mostly first years because they live on residence. But every game last season, even when the men's team was kind of and the women's team was really good, you still had great crowds come out for both. So definitely having sports close to campus would do wonders for getting students to actually come to the games. And I guess sort of just wrap things up here, I thought the timing of Melissa's hiring was also really just, it worked out well, because you have sort of this, like, finally sports are coming back after a year plus off. You're having the Canada Games Park across the street finish up, and this is really the first year where the zone is available to use, because last year they finished it last year, but nobody was here to use it. So the timing, the stars aligned really well, and I think just again, great hire, and I think Melissa will do wonders for growing sports here at Brock.
Now we'll talk about my article on probably a less serious note, although subject matter is a little serious, but definitely strays into the absurd. But hey, that's what a year and a half of a pandemic will do to you. Get a little cynical about the whole thing. But in optimistic news about the pandemic, there's a new treatment being tested. So not a vaccine, but a treatment. Oh Lord, it's called molnupiravir. Probably not what it's called, but check out my article. You'll see the actual spelling, and you might actually make more sense of the pronunciation than I did. But it's performing well in recent trials at reducing the effects of the virus. So, in my opinion, which is not an educated opinion, but an opinion nonetheless, I'm thinking that plus, vaccination rate that's continuing to go up could mean an end of thinking of COVID in a pandemic sense. It might mean a little bit more normalcy for all of us, because, if it's something that can be treated, and you have the vaccine that reduces the effects, then we're looking at something that's kind of more normalized, right? Something that you can go to the doctor, get a prescription for, and you're back on your feet in, under a week. So, crossing my fingers that's the case. But before we kind of get into some discussion, I'm just curious if Holly or Jonah, you guys have any thoughts on the initial facts of this?
Yeah, so it's like, it's kind of like the same as, like, I don't know, you get like the chicken pox, and like before the chicken pox killed people, but now because there's a vaccine and effective treatment for it, this is the effective treatment basically. Like, it's like you go to the doctor and get this prescribed. Okay, that makes sense.
That's my uneducated understanding of what this is and what it would do. But if that's what it does, and if that is what it is, then yeah, I'm thinking that's where we're at. I think it's coming up on that chickenpox phase of COVID, which would be fantastic.
Chickenpox phase. That's what they called 6th grade at my elementary school. But that sounds like, I don't know, hopeful. That sounds great. Hopefully it's, not going to explode, because if anything, this last year has taught us anything, is that whenever things seem nice, they inevitably sort of go to hell.
Yeah, when you get good news, add another 6 months onto the pandemic. Just as a rule of thumb.
Yeah, it seems like the goal for COVID has and continues to be, like, just make it so that in like 2 years time, whatever if you get COVID, you're like runny nose, sore throat for 2 days, then you're back on your feet and no big deal. I never had chickenpox. I didn't know that was a big thing, but it sounds promising from Noah's article, which is like basically all I've read up on it. But if there's a pill that can reduce the symptoms, then I'm all for it.
Yeah, and that's the key, that it's a pill, because, and I mentioned in the article, and this kind of segues into more the conversation about it, there are treatments now, not all proven and not all approved, and some more controversial than others, but there are definitely treatments that have kind of been not proven, but have shown in like kind of anecdotal cases to have some effect on improving people's chances of fighting the virus and recovering. But the big one that I mentioned is Joe Rogan, and for obvious reason, for those who might have heard the news, I don't know if either of you have heard of his.
I'm not a big Joe Rogan guy. His bald head pops up on my feed every now and then, but like I can't
miss him. He looks like a big thumb.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I do know what you're talking about, but as a whole, I'm not really all that interested in the life of Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Also not a Joe Rogan guy. I don't know. To me, Joe Rogan is the guy who used to host Fear Factor and then got a podcast. And now if I hear anyone say that they're a really big fan of that podcast, I know to stop talking to them. That's really my thoughts on Joe Rogan.
I would call myself Joe Rogan curious, in that I have enjoyed the podcast. I'm not a Spotify user, so not a subscriber these days. Um, and certainly, a lot of his COVID views have been spurious at best, and he does hold a lot of views as certainly disagreeable, certainly inflammatory. But there are certainly occasions where you can have, and there is either productive or valuable or just funny conversation on his show. So I have enjoyed it from time to time, which is why it kind of stuck out to me when I read these headlines that he's taking this drug for like livestock or something. But then when you look more into it, it's like technically there's like a human version of this medication, which is what he's taking. But then people are mad because he's still like, other people are buying like the livestock version, and it's killing people because they're taking this medication meant for massive animals like horses and cows that it's not made to be taken by a human being. So it's kind of like the weirdest story ever, and I was just happy to kind of get to toss it in there because it's just one of those things that's come up that totally has had no registered effect on like pop culture, you know what I mean? But it's one of those crazy stories that's come up in the last 18 months that just literally the next day it's gone. And you're like, wait, how did we not talk about this way more? Because it was so insane that this was a big story.
Yeah, isn't it like a horse dewormer? Isn't
Yes.
that what this is
Yeah.
that he's taking?
So my sister owns a horse.
Yeah.
And since this is, so it was before Rogan, this drug, ivermectin is what it's called, was like catching on as a COVID treatment or whatever. And so she said that to get meds for her horse, because she said you give ivermectin to a horse like once a year, just because like horses get worms because they just eat grass out, right? They just are eating things off the ground and eating whatever they want, right? So they get worms. So you treat them for that kind of preventatively once a year with ivermectin. And so she went to go buy it, and she needed like proof of ownership of her horse this time, and like it was like a whole ordeal because apparently people are friggin' buying this stuff like to take themselves, which is just absolutely absurd. But just wanted to throw that in there because I thought that was absolutely insane. But with that, we can move forward a little bit. So so Holly, you kind of mentioned this, and it was kind of the point of my article that I think this would be the key. Or no, was that you, Jonah, that mentioned that this is kind of like the key for the ending to have?
Oh yeah, I think I said like the goal should be to make it like a flu.
Yeah, and it seems like that's the point of this. Again, I really don't know, and I don't even know the. I saw that it said it was effective at decreasing hospitalizations and like effects, but it didn't necessarily speak to like what. I don't, you know what I mean? It didn't speak to like the wider implication of that, or if that was like what group necessarily it was for. They're talking about it was a higher, like a group that's like a higher risk of developing further issues. So I don't know its effectiveness with say like younger people or people without certain comorbidities, but it seems like this is kind of the key, but I'm curious if you guys have any other ideas on that or
not really. No.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think like the question that you sort of like wrote down in our little outline is like, what will it take for the pandemic part to end? And I think that is the key. But I also think like when you're talking about like treatments, it's also like really important to sort of be able to sort of like treat the like, it sounds like the world's dumbest name, but like long COVID is like when people are infected with it and then, you know, they recover from the first part and they're not contagious anymore, but they still have like those like side effects of like fatigue and their lungs aren't working as well as they used to. And like, I am a sports person, so like athletes have like talked about it, like myocarditis, their heart is not working properly. I watch race cars now, so I watched a race, and like Lewis Hamilton, like the big race car guy, like he really, they both just shook their heads at me. I'm impressed that I know a sports thing that Jonah doesn't. I don't know. I watched Talladega Nights when I was a kid. So but yeah, so like he like is like, these are people who are like super in shape and super healthy, and they get COVID, and then long COVID just like sort of like knocks them out for a while, and like potentially for a long time. So I think like having like a pill that you can take to reduce the side effects definitely like will end the pandemic part where like, you know, we can't leave our houses and we have to wear masks all the time and that kind of thing. But I think to like end the like, I don't know, radically altering the course of human history part of it, you do have to sort of like make sure that like there's also like a treatment that for that, and like understanding that there's still like so much that we don't know, which is a little bit insane.
What I read didn't speak to long COVID, but you're right. I think a treatment that can, you know, it'd be curious if it's caught at a certain point, if taking this or any other treatment could potentially, you know, stop that in its tracks, right? To avoid that effect, because it could be an issue of letting it run its course that could be causing that long COVID potentially. I don't know how viruses work. I'm not a doctor. I'm just saying things that come to my head that kind of make somewhat sense a little bit. But yeah, I'm curious if that could potentially have any impact on that.
Yeah, like I've got like lung issues just from like, I've always had janky lungs, like I was born with bad lungs. And so like when like most of my lung damage isn't caused by like, cause I get bronchitis about every winter, and most of my lung damage isn't caused by like the virus itself, it's caused by the coughing. So I don't know if that's the case with COVID, but I guess if it was, having a treatment that reduces that symptom works. But yeah, that's again my uneducated opinion. Only education is having janky lungs.
Now, we mentioned it a couple of times, but none of us are educated to be talking about viruses, especially not COVID-19, but any viruses, because we're not scientists, we're not doctors. But when I mentioned that in my article, it sparked a little bit of discussion that I'm no scientist, I'm furthest from it, I'm a political scientist. And so I'm just curious, hearing from you two SPEMA majors, technically applied health science majors, who do we really think is closer to being an actual scientist on this matter? I'm curious.
Well, neither, but our degrees say applied health science on it, and so will our news editor, Chad Ellis, who is a medical science major. So he's not here, but he would be the most qualified to talk about this. But it is funny that both our pieces of paper will say the same things.
That is completely absurd that you guys get a Bachelor of Science.
Technically, we get a Bachelor of Sport Management. It's its own thing. It's a BSM. It's kind of like the same sort of like group as like a BBA. SPEMA is like a business degree in disguise. It's like that thing, you know how like when you were in like high school math class and the teacher was trying to explain something and the football player's in the back and he's like, I don't care about math, and then the math teacher's like, but what if I use a sports metaphor? And it's basically that. So yeah, there's not a whole lot of science going on. We do some research, but it's all about sports. So
right, but university, every degree does a little bit of research. Yeah. There's some research methods elements. So like, but speaking non-hyperbolically, is there actually like science elements aside from like research methods and quantitative, qualitative?
No.
There's no like medical or biological, nothing.
Oh god, no. I actually tried.
Why is it in applied health?
It's because it's like Holly said, it's its own thing. It's a BSM. It's a Bachelor of Sport Management, which is like the whole like that's aside from Kyle Dubas, that's like number 2 on the like recruiting list. Is that it's like you get a Bachelor of Sport Management as opposed to other institutions where it is like either a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science in sport. Like Brock is like the only school that actually has an independent Bachelor of Sport Management.
But if we had to give it a faculty,
it doesn't belong. It belongs
in its school.
Yeah, well, it's its own thing. It like it belongs.
If you had to give them one of the umbrellas,
I don't think Goodman wants us probably.
But if of the umbrella like faculties that exist, you have social science, you have humanities. There's applied health. Yeah. There's Con Ed. It's obviously not Con Ed. Doesn't make sense there. Is the only other one business? Or are we missing one?
I have no.
Math and science is like the other.
Not that. But yeah, no. I guess
business
like
is the only one that makes.
Like, it is the only one that makes sense, but it really is kind of just its own thing.
Well, anyways, we just wanted that tangential conversation.
Yeah, we're just getting roasted about SPEMA.
Just had to put that in there because I was getting roasted about political science.
Just a little.
Justified. I only get a Bachelor of Arts, so I'm kind of the lowest on the totem pole.
So would you say you're an artist?
Apparently, yeah. Apparently what I've been doing is artwork. But just had to get my shots in there at SPIMA, so I didn't go.
It's fair enough. Okay, so we're going to talk about my opinion again. I don't know why Noah likes my opinion so much. They're just all so good. I'm running out of opinions. But so one of the opinions that I wrote this week was about commuting. I think something that's on a lot of people's minds as we sort of return back to in-person life. I know one thing that I definitely noticed, and I mentioned this in the article, is that when I was doing like classes exclusively online, I did feel like I had a little bit more time in the day. You know, I wasn't like eating a granola bar for breakfast as I like jogged to catch the bus. I could like, even if I woke up like 10 minutes before class started, which, you know, now would be a disaster, but back then just meant, oh, okay, well, I'll just turn on class while I like make breakfast. And that was a thing that I could do. It felt very much like my time was more mine and it was sort of free time, and then sort of returning to having to be places in person. Commuting definitely sort of takes a long time out of your day. I know that my commute every day is like shorter than a lot of people's. It's shorter certainly than both of my parents have to do. My mom sometimes has like a 6-hour commute every day. She travels a lot for her job, so like sometimes she's coming back from like London to Brantford. But yeah, I commute to school at least about an hour and a half round trip. To get here is about 45 minutes. To get home is about 45 minutes. It's not that bad. I actually am like one of like the weirdos who like enjoys my commute. I like to sort of just, especially because it's the bus, I like to sort of just be able to like sit there and like listen to music and not really have to think about anything. But I just sort of got a little bit off track there. But sort of like commuting takes a lot of time out of your day, and with a lot of sort of places, businesses, especially sort of like in the sort of like office worker realm, where those people have sort of been able to work from home for the past year and a half, they're finding it like sort of difficult to convince people to return to the office, because a lot of people are like, well, I could do my job perfectly fine from home, and you know, I felt more balanced and better about life when I was working from home, and now they have to go back to commuting to get to the office, commute back, and a lot of people just sort of feel like it's a waste of time now. So I talked about maybe a solution to that could be sort of pay people for their commutes, like some kind of, I didn't like get into specifics like you clock in when you start, or like compensation, or like paying for your gas or whatever, but those are all sort of options and ideas. And I think like compensating people for their commute somehow is like feels fair enough to me, because like, I don't know, that time's not mine when I am commuting. It is in service of my boss. So I think it's like a decent idea. And you know, if places are struggling to convince people to come back, they do have to do something about that. So yeah, I was just wondering, like, what do you guys think about that? Would you like to get paid for your commute? Noah, do you want to pay us for our commute?
We'll start with me getting paid for my commute first. I'd love to get my gas comped by the Brock Press. That'd be awesome. But no, we to be fair, not to toot my own horn, but I have put in a much more robust expense program than we've had before. I have paid for some travel expense. We do have the free bus pass, which is one thing, and we don't pay for time per se, but like someone had, you know, they were covering a game for sports. I was Jonah's covering a game for sports. Bus wasn't running. It wasn't doable, so it covered his Uber price.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. But I know we haven't done that in the past. Certainly not to this extent. I think it's totally reasonable, totally fair expectation. We don't pay hourly, which you guys know. So you know, for the time, it doesn't really work in our space just because of how we pay. But I don't think it's unfair at all. And I like kind of in your article you mentioned about like shortening the workday to accommodate that. I thought that was pretty interesting, cutting off an hour or two, even if it was an hour from each side. So then really like the expectation of, you know, the travel time is kind of baked into that old like 9 to 5 workday, but instead now you work 10 to 4 and you have those hours on either buffer for travel time. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I definitely, like, I had a long, like, my high school was like about 50 minutes by public transit there and back. Somehow it was my homeschool still, which is, I don't know, but it's funny that Holly said she sort of like enjoys the commute, because I definitely didn't mind my high school commute in the mornings, and actually going home sucked because like then you're coming out with the crowd with all the kids. But my morning one honestly in high school was fine. The buses here, like I don't have a car, so my like bus here is like, I don't know, 10 minutes to campus. Like it's pretty close. But I know like my dad definitely, he used to work like downtown Toronto, so he would just like streetcar down every day. But then he got a job like in Mississauga, and so he needed to like buy a car to get there. And I think they didn't obviously buy his car, but I think they gave him some like get gas stipend or paid for his like highway toll. Like they did something to like alleviate part of the cost, which I think was helpful for him.
Yeah, mileage is fairly common. Kind of the amount varies, but not common enough for me to get it, I guess. But hey, whatever. Not complaining, I guess.
Yeah, it's like super common to sort of just like pay for someone's, like it's common to pay for someone's travel, not necessarily their commute. So like if you have to like travel for a job, if it's part of your job to travel somewhere. I was talking about that to an extent, but also like the time of it all, like time is super valuable, and time is like, you know, if I can avoid sitting in traffic for an hour, I would love to do that. Like the reason that I'm able to enjoy my commute is because there is no traffic. I don't have to like sit in rush hour traffic. There's no highway. I don't drive. I'm on a bus. But yeah, if I was in rush hour traffic, I definitely feel like that is a waste of an hour that I am not getting paid for. I'm just sitting around. There's stuff I'd rather be doing with that hour, but I couldn't because I'd be in a car. So yeah, just sort of like compensating people for that time, whether it is you clock in when you leave the house. Of course, there's issues with that. I'm no economist. But yeah,
You're a scientist.
I'm a scientist, actually. I'm an applied health scientist. But yeah, or if it's indeed, like Noah said, shortening the workday so that, like, because a lot of, like, office jobs are, like, pretty salaried. So, like, your workday is 9 to 5 still, but it's actually, you have to leave the house at 9 and you get home at 5. And I think that makes some sense in my head, at least. I don't know if it makes sense in anybody else's, but yeah, sort of just like giving people that time back, especially because after having worked from home, people know that it exists now, and they don't want to give it up. So you've got to do something.
I've found that I do appreciate kind of that ritual of, you know, getting to drive, even though it's not very far from my house to Brock anymore, but even just kind of driving anywhere for anything, it's kind of nice to have that time to yourself, like you were mentioning, because I'll listen to like podcasts and stuff, and it's I think, you know, it was really piling up my queue, my podcast queue before things were even somewhat more open. Now it's pretty much back to normal, but yeah, back a while I was deleting podcasts endlessly because I just wasn't having the time to listen to these. I'm like, how did I listen to all these shows every week before? But it's that driving time. It's that time spent kind of the interstitial time that you almost forget about in normal life, right? But now, like you said, Holly, it's really people have been woken up to it, that they're like, hey, I'm losing like hours a day of like traveling, even here at Brock, like across campus for classes, and like waiting in lines to get a coffee between class, and then walking to my car, and then driving back, or walking to the bus and waiting at the bus, and then getting on the bus. Like there's a lot of this little interstitial time that definitely adds up, and it was kind of baked into the cake before, but I think you're hitting on something here with this article, which is why I wanted to talk about it. Is that, you know, people have kind of been alerted to that lost time.
Yeah, especially like here in St. Catharines, there is only buses, which is like, as someone like I get motion sick very easily. Like, so the buses are like brutal for me, which is why I preferred, like in Toronto, I would streetcar and then subway to my school, which are both on some smooth tracks, so there's no bumps or speed bumps, and they have their own lanes, so there was never traffic, and there was nothing better than like zooming across in a streetcar and seeing like lineups of cars at every red light.
It's funny that you say that the subway didn't make you motion sick, because anytime I'm in Toronto, I'm like can barely hold on for my life. It's so bumpy. It's so bumpy, and like the stops and stuff. I just feel like that's, I don't know, whatever. That's totally off topic, but
Brantford barely has a bus. Like when I got to St. Catharines in my first year of university, and I opened up the St. Catharines Transit app, and there were like dozens of lines. I was like, oh my god, this is the peak of modern travel, because before that I just walked everywhere.
Yeah, but it's all in service of Brock. And pretty much when students aren't here, they have maybe half the buses, and they're all empty every hour of the day, basically.
That's funny because, like, coming from Toronto, which admittedly their public transit system is very, very flawed. But when I first came here and opened the bus app, I was like, what the hell? There's only 6 lines. Like, I'm used to being able to get wherever I need via subway or streetcar. So different towns.
Yeah, it's a horrifically planned city. It's really, really sprawled out, St. Catharines. At least there's some grid and some structure to Toronto, but this is just
the grid is so. I think Toronto's so easy, all because I mean I've lived there my whole life, but it's just a grid here. Everywhere I type into Google Maps, it says 5-minute drive, 45-minute walk. I'm like, what? How does that work? It's because it's hills and forests and rivers.
Yep, it's all totally based around driving this city, and it's becoming increasingly outdated. For more and more people in the city to get anywhere and for it to work. Luckily, we have some people. And again, this is off topic too, so I'll leave it right at this and then give it to Holly for her final thoughts. But there are actually efforts at the city right now from council to make things a little bit more walkable, and it's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on like a massive open wound, but like. It's a start, and I'm happy to see that kind of commitment. And, I don't know if you guys knew, but like they closed part of St. Paul Street over the weekends and stuff. And it's just all those little things for a massive driving city like St. Catharines. It seems very little, but it definitely was something that anyone I've talked to who's lived here their whole life enjoys and appreciates. So it's like, it's nice to see these things that are kind of meeting people's needs and their wants a little bit, coming in piece by piece.
Yeah, I miss living in a city because Brantford, it's kind of poorly designed, but it's not. It's like it was like an industrial revolution kind of city because it's on the Grand River, so it is sort of well designed where people can walk around at least. So I do miss living in a city where I can walk around. That's what I wanted to say about walking. I miss walking. St. Catharines, let me walk around. Yeah, I have to like take the bus. I had a friend who once tried to walk to a friend's house, and he had to like walk under the highway to get there. And he was like, he's also from around Brantford, so he was like, why? I put it into Google and they told me to cross the highway. What is the city? So yeah, for all of those reasons and more, maybe pay people to do that. Especially if you have to fight, bears and planes and trains on the way to work. If you want people to come back to work for you, pay them to do it, is my political stance coming out of the pandemic, and that applies to commuting.
And that does it for another episode of The Latest, a much more lively episode thanks to our new mic setup here, which is a work in progress, but will continue to get better. So we're excited about that. It's already paid off. I think we had a much more involved conversation, which I think everyone should enjoy. I'm sure both of you had a much better time too, not having to share a single microphone. And it was great to talk about all of your articles. All the articles that we did talk about, you can find them in the description, and links to those on our website and many more you can find there as well. So at our website, you can also find links to our social media accounts. And on top of following us on social media, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Anchor.fm, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, and Spotify. Just be sure to look up The Latest, the Brock Press podcast, and you should find us no problem. You can also find the podcast on our YouTube channel and on our website directly. With all that said, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week for another episode of The Latest.